Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight we have a special guest, Dr. Gabriel Batarse. He is 82 years old, and he lived in Palestine before the Israeli state was set up. So he has a unique perspective to tell us tonight. And before we get into the interview, I want to remind you that you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at ucy.tv. You can also catch my work at activist posts, theantimedia.org, and my own website, brandonturbeville.com, where I repost all of my articles, all of the interviews, all the archive versions of this show, and all the relevant information there. It's brandonturbeville.com. Tonight, as I said, my special guest is Dr. Gabriel Batarse, and he has a PhD in Psychological Services and Education from the University of South Carolina. And he was born in Palestine and lived there for many years. And again, he's 82, so he lived there before the Israeli state was set up. So I've invited him to come on and tell his life story and give his perspective on the situation in that part of the world. So welcome to the show, Dr. Batarse.
Thank you.
So why don't we begin by you just telling us, your story. Tell us where you were born and how you ended up here.
Well, my family is from Bethlehem, Palestine. That's where the family kind of lived and worked. The first few years I lived in Bethlehem and went to kindergarten there. Then my father moved to Jerusalem because we had some work there. And I went to school while living in Jerusalem. And my school was within the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. And we lived there until 1948, when the Israelis occupied Palestine, and Jewish terrorists threatened us, and we had to leave our home in Jerusalem. Although some Jewish friends that we used to visit with offered to protect us, but we did not want to put them in danger, so we did leave. Went back to Bethlehem, but the situation in Bethlehem, the Israeli occupation kind of surrounding it, my father could not make a living there, so we eventually moved to Egypt, where he could get work, and started a business there. I lived in Heliopolis in Egypt, and fortunately when we left, I had taken my high school textbooks with me. I was able to study algebra, geometry, trigonometry, European history, and kept up with my English and Arabic and French. And then I sat for the London University Matriculation, which is a degree that shows that you have finished high school work and makes you eligible to go to university. I was able from there to go to Middle East College in Lebanon on a work-study program, so I could pay my way through college there. I graduated from Middle East College and went back to Palestine and taught in Ramallah when Ramallah was still under the Jordanian administration. I taught at the Friends Boys School, which is a high school run by the Quakers in Ramallah. In that school I taught English and religion. Even one of the teachers there told me about the University of South Carolina and told me, why don't you go there and do your graduate studies there. I had saved enough money that I could come to the United States and go to the University of South Carolina, where I was given an assistantship which helped with my paying my way through the University of South Carolina. And so while I was there, I kind of worked, and with the help of the assistantship, I was able to go through years it took to get a PhD. While working on my PhD, I did meet my wife. She is from Clover, South Carolina. We started dating and eventually decided we wanted to marry. And so we did get married and went back home to Palestine. We occupied for, but I could find a satisfying job. So after a year there, and my daughter being born in Jerusalem, my eldest, we decided to come to the United States where we could make a life for ourselves. And so we ended up back in Colombia, where I did find work, and we lived in Colombia for a while. Then I found a job in Charleston, so we moved to Charleston and lived in Turbeville, where we had two other children, my eldest son Mark and my youngest son Matthew. And of course we lived there for a while, it was several years. And I think that's my story so far.
Okay. Well, I want to ask you to go back to in Palestine. I want you to tell the listeners what life was like before the Israeli state was set up in '48. What was Palestine like before then?
Well, before, obviously, Palestine was under a mandate by the British. They governed Palestine. And during that period, Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived together in peace. There was no problem. Like I said, we had a Jewish family for friends, and we would visit each other every other weekend. One weekend they'd come to us, the other weekend we go to them. And of course, our mothers cooked for the meals for that during that visit. So until more and more Zionist Jews started coming into Palestine, the population seemed to get along pretty well regardless of religious background. So I would say until 1948 I had a pleasant life. I enjoyed going to school, had good teachers. I was a member of the YMCA in Jerusalem, and of course spent time at the YMCA where we had swimming and we had playgrounds. They had a boys' library there, actually young people's library, both boys and girls. And I did get to read quite a few American books written for boys, like Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, books like that. I really read quite a bit, but mainly, enjoyed going there, spending time running around in the playgrounds, playing table games. We had a place where we could play ping pong, and then we had checkers, and my time I spent at the YMCA was really very a happy time. We had good supervisors there, people who worked with us. So until the creation of the State of Israel, I think life was quite, it was a happy life. But then once that started, and the Zionists I'm not talking about all Jews now. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about the Zionists who had designs on Palestine, one of which was they planned to drive the Palestinians out of the country and create a uniquely Jewish state. And of course, we would not fit into their plan, and therefore they did drive us out of our homes. My grandparents, aunts and uncles on my mother's side lived in Jaffa and in those small towns around Jaffa, and they were all driven out of their homes, ended up as refugees in Jordan. And of course, my grandfather was a deacon in the Anglican Church in Jaffa, so they did not differentiate between Christian and Muslim Palestinians. If you're a Palestinian, it didn't matter whether you're Christian or Muslim. You were a target if you got in their way. So that's the background. I think, and now, of course, since 1948, because of what happened then, where the people were driven out of their homes, we had not had any peace in Palestine, which is now kind of divided into an Israeli state and an occupied West Bank, which is kind of interesting that we don't even use the word Palestine anymore in the Israeli press and so on. So I'm hoping that sooner or later the world would kind of wake up to the fact that the Palestinians were wronged and would try to get some kind of equitable solution. Obviously, a lot of Jews living now in what used to be Palestine, so I don't see driving them out, but at the same time I think we should accommodate the Palestinians who still own homes in what is now Israel, and they still own farms and orange groves. Try to see if we can devise a plan where both populations, the Christian, Muslim, Palestinians and the Israelis, can live in peace. This is what I'm hoping. Of course, I'm an American citizen now, so it's not a question of what's good for me, because I have what I consider an extremely good life. I'm happily married, have children who are doing well. At 82, I still think I'm healthy enough to get around and do things. Any other?
Yeah.
What else can I?
The way you described Palestine, some people, before the Israelis, they might be surprised because, this was not some backward place in the desert. This was a place that was modern. This was very modern.
Yeah.
And it had people who had homes and businesses and schools, and it started to change for the Palestinian people, and especially in '48. And can you kind of compare and contrast life before 1948 with life after?
Well, before '48 we were able to work. We had Palestinian lawyers, Palestinian physicians, we had Palestinian engineers, we had orange groves, olive trees, farms. It was, a beautiful country. I mean, when you walked into out into these hills and plains, you know, it was fertile land. Mostly we had a lot of olive trees that we, you know, pickled olives and had olive oil from our olive trees. We planted wheat and barley and we could do these things. We had good roads. People traveled very easily. We had good public transportation. We could take the bus from Bethlehem to Jerusalem very easily. They ran one time on schedule, so it was easy to travel from town to town with the public transportation that was available. We had movie theaters. In fact, growing up in Jerusalem, I watched cowboy movies. I don't know how many people remember Flash Gordon, one of the earliest space type movies. I remember Rin-Tin Tin and you know, saying, and then during the First or Second World War, we did watch World War II movies, you know. So we had bars, we had dance clubs, we, you know, went dancing. We danced the tango and the rumba, the samba in those days, and then eventually we, you know, danced to. Later on, obviously, we danced to rock and roll and the more modern music, but. So life was pleasant in general. We could make a good living. When I went to school, I had, although it was a Christian school, the students were Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. So on the playground, I played with both Muslim and Jewish schoolmates. Yeah, I'm saying, you know, the life there was very pleasant. People went about, had businesses, had jobs, professional jobs. Palestinians were very highly educated. We had a 98% literacy rate. We had a lot of good parochial schools. You know, the Catholic Church had a lot of parochial schools scattered all over, and of course we had public schools. You know, highly educated population. We obviously, our mother tongue was Arabic, but of course the Jewish population spoke Jewish Hebrew, but most of them spoke Arabic. In fact, some of my fellow Jewish students did better at Arabic grammar than I did. So we had Palestinian Jews, in other words, before the creation of Israel. The Jews living in Palestine considered themselves Palestinians. They just were part of the community. And of course, now after 1948, there was this big cathedral created this difference. Well, I remember when I visited my grandparents in Jaffa, my aunts worked for Jewish families, and I would go visit with them and played with their children. I was, you know, very young at that time. So there, you know, until we had this flood of Zionist Jews coming to Palestine, we got along very well. There were times, of course, of trouble when, you know, the Zionists started stirring things up, there would be trouble, but it would be settled, and people went back to normal life. Looking back, I had a happy childhood, and like I said, I had friends, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish friends. We didn't think about it at that point. But of course, after 48, things changed drastically.
How did they change early on in 48? Can you just...
Well, the Jewish terrorist gangs went around, killing and threatening Palestinians, grabbing them out of their home. Historically, the massacre of the Arab Palestinian village of Dar Yassin, where Jewish terrorists went through the streets and dragged people out of their homes and just killed them on the spot. And it was just that particular incident scared the rest of the Palestinians. So when Jewish terrorists would appear, they would start fleeing, because they knew if they stayed around, they would be massacred. And of course there was a reaction on the part of the Palestinians. They did arm themselves, and of course they started shooting back when they could. And of course we didn't have the most modern equipment. Most of the guns that the Palestinians were able to acquire were World War II leftovers by the British and the Germans and so on, that they had rescued from the battlefields, and some of them were still rusty. It had to be cleaned and so on. And then some of the Arab nations around sent in token armies to protect the Palestinians, but they were totally ineffective. They had not been engaged in any kind of war before this. And so with the Israelis being heavily armed, especially they got most of their arms, funny to say that, from the communist countries from East Europe. Czechoslovakia was the main supplier of machine guns and mortars and so on to the Israelis. So they were quite well armed, and obviously one of the Arab armies, the Jordanian army, the leadership there was more interested in kind of working out some kind of a peaceful situation with the Israelis, and so there was not that much fighting on the part of these Arab armies that came in. And I call them armies, but really they were ragtag, and they were not, except for the Jordanian army. It was the one that was most well organized, because it was trained by the British. As far as the Egyptian and Syrian, they were more or less volunteers and what I would call like that. They were not really well-armed or trained. So, as a result, obviously, the Palestinians lost most of their property. The Israelis bulldozed at least 500 villages totally out of existence. You can't find a trace of these villages, Palestinian villages. And of course, in their place they built settlements. Now we call the settlements colonies. When we were still, in Palestine, we called these settlements colonies. So, bulldozed our villages, took over the farms, and right now they're continuing bulldozing our olive trees. And these olive trees or 100 years old. I mean, they take tens of years to get, if you plant one, it's going to take a while for it to really grow enough to produce any olives. And to me, just bulldozing a holy olive tree, as far as I'm concerned, is a sin. But they're doing it. And I don't know why. It seems to me nobody is willing. Well, the United Nations has passed resolution after resolution after resolution condemning Israel's predatory behavior, their occupation of property, their driving out people. There are many United Nations resolutions telling Israel quit and get out, but nobody is willing to enforce these United Nations resolutions. They are there. They've been there for years now. And the latest, of course, the 67 war was the one that really totally destroyed any hope of a Palestinian state, because since 67 the Israelis have expanded their occupation into the West Bank, which was only about a third of Palestine that was left to the Palestinians. And now, with the new settlements being built and they're expanding into the West Bank, even if we created a Palestinian state, it would be maybe 10% of what used to be Palestine. And that, of course, is not realistic. We have to, the United Nations would find some rule that would force the Israelis to at least go back to the 67 borders, which would leave the Palestinians a semblance of a state that is viable. So that would be the only thing that I think would maybe bring peace to Palestine, Israel. If the Israelis would just get out of the areas they occupied in 67. And of course the problem now is that all of those settlements, and I think these Israelis that are living in the settlements will have to take Palestinian nationality, I guess, become Palestinians and live, or the settlements can be turned over to people who lost their homes in Jaffa, Haifa, and all of those towns that are now occupied by Israel, and Israel is living in those homes. My grandparents had a beautiful house in Jaffa, 2 stories, 3 apartments. The home was built the way we do, out of concrete blocks and, beautifully painted and so on. It's going to last forever. We don't build homes that can be destroyed even by fire. And the Israelis are living in those homes. So what would be just would be to exchange homes, get the settlers out of the settlements and let the people who own homes in what is now Israel get those homes in return. I'm thinking I'm thinking, maybe that would take a lot of, it would take a miracle to do that. So the only way that I can see that there would be a Palestinian state within the 67 borders, and the settlers would continue to live there, but would have to become Palestinian.
I want to step back just a little bit, because I think a lot of people who listen to this are going to have sort of a false idea of history, because all they're used to hearing is It's the fundamentalist Muslim Palestinians versus the poor Jewish Israelis, and that couldn't be further from the truth. But when the Israelis, and it's important to differentiate between the Jewish people who lived there and the Zionist Israelis that came in. But they were not. It wasn't a fundamentalist Muslim state, as you pointed out.
Right.
But when the Israelis came in, they kicked out Muslims and Christians from their homes. They have decimated the Christian population.
My grandparents, uncles and aunts who lived in the area around Jaffa and Lydda and so on, they were all Anglican, Christian. Here we call them Episcopalians. And my family and in Bethlehem. Bethlehem was 80% Christian, mostly Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic, Lutherans. We had some Lutherans there. So before the Israeli occupation, between 30 and 35% of the population of Palestine was Christian. Since the occupation, the number of Christians still living there is down to about 3 or 4%. Most of the Christians, highly educated, we just moved. We had a lot of connections in Latin America, so quite a few went there. We had connections with Europe, so some went to Europe. Many moved into the neighboring Arab countries, like Lebanon and Syria. And the fundamentalist Islam came about because of what happened in Palestine. There were some fundamentalist Muslims, but they were not the power. The majority of Muslims were moderate, educated, not interested in any kind of what we call jihad. That was far away from their thinking. They wanted an education, the universities in Egypt were co-ed. Both women and men went to the same university, studied law and engineering, medicine. When I lived in Egypt as a refugee, Muslim women in Egypt did not wear the hijab. The majority of them were educated, they wore Western clothing. This wave of fundamentalists has come about because of what happened where the West backed the Israeli occupation and the West kind of interfered in a lot of the Arab countries. And this gave the fundamentalist Muslims some kind of issue to hang on to, so they used it to kind of push their idea of Islam. Historically, what the Muslims took Palestine, invaded Palestine and so on, Jews and Christians were allowed to worship. They never touched any of our churches. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, have been there since the 4th century. And when the Muslims took Palestine, those churches were left alone. And Christians continued to worship in them. And of course we have a lot of historic churches never touched, never bothered. So again, the fundamentalist Islam is gaining because of what the West has done in the Middle East. When we attacked Iraq, in reaction to 9/11, although Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And in fact, Saddam Hussein was obviously a dictator, and I don't like dictators, but at least he kept Al-Qaeda out of Iraq and under control. So, attacking him, we took away one of the powers in the Arab world that was opposed to Al-Qaeda. We took him out of the picture, and look at what's happening in Iraq right now. The Al-Qaeda is gaining strength in Iraq. They have occupied about a third of the country by now. And of course, Syria is another example of such things happening. So, all I'm saying is this fundamentalist Islam is a new phenomenon. Islam wasn't this way.
Right. That's the same. That's the same thing I've heard from many of the people that I know who are from Syria.
Yes.
And Lebanon. They said the same thing. Now you mentioned I want to bring up the churches because we've talked before, and you told me about some of the graffiti the Israelis sprayed on the churches.
Oh yes, it was in fact published in some of the papers here in the United States. In fact, I saw it mostly on computer, the internet, and they showed what they had painted things like Jesus is a monkey, and painted all kinds of ugly words on the churches, the church doors and the church walls. Of course, the Eastern had to clean them, but some of the worst was, and one of the statements that I think was the worst was when they called Jesus a monkey. And there were other words used that I cannot use to broadcast. There were some real words that usually when they are said on TV, you hear a blip, you don't hear them. So they've really done, and they have destroyed some churches. Not, they haven't touched the historic ones, obviously, because that would have raised all kinds of world opinion. So they've opposed them all.
Now, can you tell us what the type of people who were coming over into Palestine to set up a Jewish state, right? The Israelis.
Most of them were Zionists, especially from East Europe and Russia. It's interesting that much of the atrocities that are being committed in the occupied Palestine right now, the Russian Jews, I think, are mostly responsible for some of that kind of behavior. I don't know why, but it seems to me, they seem to be more aggressive. And so a lot of these Jews that are living now in Palestine, their background is not Hebrew. Their background is a Khazar tribe that was converted to Judaism. And they are mostly from the area of the Caucasus and that area. So these Jews really are not Semitic in a sense. They never were. Their ancestors were not from Palestine. Their ancestors were out there. So again, it's right now the Jews in Palestine, the Zionists especially, are the problem. Because Jews lived in all of that. In fact, even after we were driven out of our home, ended up as refugees in Egypt, Jews were living in Egypt. I went to school with Jewish students. This has changed eventually, because Israel was started using these Arab Jews to spy for them and so on, and that kind of put them in jeopardy. But there were Jews in Lebanon, Jews in Syria, Jews in Iraq, and funny, there were Jews that in Iran, members of parliament, until things got, the creation of the state of Israel made life worse for Arab Jews. They spoke Arabic. They were part of the community. There was nothing. I mean, the Jewish synagogue in Cairo was on the main street, and nobody bothered this until things got bad in terms of the war coming into play. And again, there were Jews living in Lebanon, Syria, and they all spoke Arabic, and they did very well. Like I said, some of them did better at Arabic grammar than I did. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, even some of the Jewish people who, I guess Palestinian Jews who lived there long before Israel was created,
sure.
They're not treated with respect.
No, they are not. There's a lot of prejudice within Israeli society against Eastern Jews. Lately we've been hearing about some Jews who have come to Israel from Ethiopia, from Africa, and they're trying to get them to leave the country. They don't want them to stay there, although they are historically Jewish, go back all the way to the early days of Abraham and so on. These are Jews who migrated, to Ethiopia and that part of Africa. So they're more Jewish than the Russian Jews are now running the country. So there is a lot of racial prejudice between the Jewish population in Israel at this point.
Now the Russians, many of the Russians and Eastern Europeans that came over, these guys also had ties to the Communist Party.
Oh, of course. Well, the Communist Party in Palestine, when the British were still there before 1948, we did have a Communist Party, and the Communist Party was started by these Jewish immigrants. Some of the Palestinians did join, especially among the Christians. They joined the Communist Party, but the leadership was East European Jews who brought communism into the thing, and many of them were communists. And in fact, I don't know if people remember, but in 1948, when the Jewish state was created, when Israel was created, the two countries that kind of tried to beat one another to recognize it were the United States and the Soviet Union. Those were the first two countries at the United Nations to recognize the state of Israel. So that tells you if the Soviet Union was in a hurry to recognize, it means that there were ties in the Zionist movement with Russian communists. And they were.
And both the United States and Russia funded
Israel, yeah. And of course Israel got most of its arms to fight the Palestinians from the communist countries.
And these guys came in as an arm.
Oh sure, they came in, there was 3 or 4 gangs. The Erdogan, the Yumi gang, the Stern gang, the Haganah started out as a gang. And there were several of these armed terrorist gangs that gave the British hell. They blew up wing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which was the headquarters for the mandated government, and killed over 100 people. They blew up police stations. I remember one night waking up sometime at 11 o'clock at night when they blew up a police station about 3 blocks away from our apartment in Jerusalem. And the blast was so huge, we had shutters on our windows. The shutters were blown open. But, you know, that car bomb or truck bomb was a huge one. It just totally destroyed that police station. And they killed British soldiers. They killed a British judge. So they were very active in terrorizing the British. Then finally the British kind of washed their hands and said, okay, we're leaving. Told me, you take care of it. I mean, that was the bottom line, was the British could not handle it. So they turned it over to the United Nations. They said, it's your problem, you try to do something. And of course the United Nations at that point, when Russia and the United States supported Israel, the Palestinians lost out.
Yeah, and in fact, you mentioned the gangs like the Irgun and the Stern gang, and then we have so many here in the United States, so many politicians and so forth. That's just one area of politics that have dual citizenship, that have links to the very gangs.
Oh yeah,
Rahm Emanuel is linked through his family line through Irgun, I believe.
Yeah, I think so.
So you mentioned to me before some of the groups in Israel and who of Jewish people who oppose the genocide against the Palestinians. You want to?
What is the? If I can remember now, it's been a while, but there is a definite Orthodox Jewish group that is opposed to the creation of Israel, because they said we should wait until the Messiah creates the true Israel. They said this Israel is not the Israel that God wanted, and they opposed. They said, we do not recognize this Israel. Now this is one of the Orthodox Jewish groups. Not all of them are of that mind, but there are Orthodox Jews who believe that this Jewish state is not really a Jewish state.
Yeah, and then actually before Israel was created, when it was being discussed, early 1900s, a lot of Jews were speaking out about that in Europe and saying the exact same thing.
The exact same thing. They were saying it's not, we don't want a Zionist, communist Jewish state. They wanted Judaism as a religion, not as a racist.
Yeah, it's a system.
Judaism as a religion obviously is a very humane religion. And it's unfortunate that the Israelis have given Judaism a bad name.
There was also Jews for Peace.
Well, obviously, right now in the United States, I'm in touch with Jews for Peace that really want to see that the Palestinians get justice, and so that Jews and Palestinians could live at peace. And it's an organization that is really gaining some momentum right here in the United States. And they are really quite outspoken. And they are on the internet, and they publish stories about some of the things that the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians, just like they published an article showing that the Israelis have killed at least 1,200 Palestinian children in the last year or so, victims. And of course there's another Jewish group that's coming to the J Street, or Jewish Street, it's for short. That's another group that is interested in finding a way to peace in Palestine and treating the Palestinians with justice. So there are two very active Jewish groups right now in the United States trying to get other Jews to start accepting that the United States has a responsibility to make Israel live within the international law and get out of stop its kind of extensive occupation of the little bit that the Palestinians have, and try to work with the Palestinians and give them some justice. So I'm really hopeful that with these two groups, maybe enough Jews will see, enough American Jews will see that yes, we need to intervene, we need to ask to back the United States in its effort to get Israel to obey international law and stop its human rights violations. Because we do have that ability. Without our billions of dollars in aid to Israel, Israel could not live. We send at least $5 billion a year. We give them access to our latest farms, latest fighters, latest technology. Israel is the only country in the Middle East that has a nuclear arsenal. I mean, they are the only ones in the Middle East that have the atomic bomb, and expensive. They have an arsenal of nuclear capable bombs.
They also have chemical weapons.
Oh yeah, I mean, they have both. I mean, technologically, they have the technology, they have the ability to do it, and they have done it.
So we've only got a few minutes left,
yeah.
But in the next few minutes, I was wondering if you could kind of speak to, did you say anything you want to end out the show, but particularly to American Christians,
yes,
who consider themselves supporters of Israel. What would you like to say to them?
I would say that the money they are sending, especially to the settlers, is making them just as guilty as the settlers in terms of the crimes that these settlers are committing against the Palestinians. Those Christians that send their money there, they are funding terrorism. I mean, these settlers are terrorists. In fact, they are taking land away from the Palestinians, building a wall, separating some Christian Palestinians from their farms and their olive trees. So the Christians who are sending this money are taking part in criminal activity. They are funding it. So my hope is that they will realize that they're not helping fellow Christians. They're hurting fellow Christians. I know there are two Christian villages right next to Bethlehem, Beit Sahur and Beit Jara, where the settlers have really encroached on their properties and on their farms. And those two villages, Beit Sahur and Beit Jara, are majority Christian villages. So these are the Christian farmers who are losing their land to these settlers, funded by these Christian groups. So all I'm saying is I hope these Christians will stop doing it, and so that and maybe they should send their money to these Christian villages that are trying to survive after their property has been taken from them. They should be supporting the Christians, not the Israeli occupiers. And I wish they would, because Christians need their help. You know, I don't know what else to tell them. I mean, if Jesus were around, I'm sure he would question their behavior. I don't know. I can't, I'm really kind of at this point, really, that's one thing that really upsets me, when Christians fund these terrorist activities. And we're talking about millions of dollars, we're not talking about pennies these people are doing. And I suspect some of them are what I call the legalists. They think that with the creation of the State of Israel, Jesus is going to come in the clouds tomorrow. Well, I have news for them. If he did come, he would reject them. And they need to realize Jesus is here. For a Christian, I don't need to see Jesus coming in a cloud. I know he is here. And I wish they would start thinking along those lines. Live the way Jesus told us to live. Love your neighbor, forgive your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. Do not worship mammon. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing the interview. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and maybe we'll have to continue this discussion a little later, some other time. But Dr. Batarse, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.